Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about this source, Nez's Tale, a personal reflection on growth and resilience. I really like this one. It's cool because it's not just talking about the myth. It's like how this one myth really changed how the author looks at their life.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's kind of like the author is using this myth as a way to understand themselves. It's like Nez's story becomes a mirror to kind of look at like their own struggles and how they've grown over time.
Okay, so before we get too far into the personal stuff, let's back up a bit. For anyone listening who maybe doesn't know a lot about Chinese mythology, who
Mhm.
is Neza exactly?
Sure. So Neza is a pretty popular deity in Chinese mythology. Usually he's portrayed as a young god and he's got these crazy powers and a rebellious side. He's a bit of a trickster too, but ultimately he's super powerful and always wants to make things right. He's got a strong sense of justice.
A trickster, but also wants to be fair. That's an interesting mix. Um, the source mentions that Neza had like a really strange, extraordinary birth, and he wasn't exactly what his father wanted him to be. I think you mentioned that you kind of felt that way growing up too.
Hmm.
Did that part of the story connect with you, like personally?
Oh, yeah, totally. My relationship with my dad was really complicated, and I always felt like I was trying to be someone he wanted me to be, not who I really was. So, reading about Nez's problems with his dad brought back a lot of those feelings. It made me realize that these themes of family expectations and wanting to find your own way are like super common. Everyone deals with that.
And it's wild that all that plays out in this crazy story with magic and battles and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, Neza's story is so fantastical, but it's really about family and growing up.
Exactly. The source actually points out how the author was like super into those fantastical parts at first, but it was Nez's struggles with his father, his rebellion, and then that sacrifice that really got to them.
Okay, so let's talk about that sacrifice. The source mentions Neza making this huge ultimate sacrifice. What exactly did he do, and how did the author relate that to their own life?
Well, I don't want to spoil the whole story, but basically, Nez's sacrifice is this big turning point for him. It's how he finds redemption. He puts everyone else first, even if it means making a really hard choice.
Wow, that's heavy. And the source says that really hit home for the author because they were going through some big changes themselves. What was happening in their life, and how did Nez's sacrifice inspire them?
So the author was dealing with something where they had to make a tough call. They had to put other people's needs before their own, and they felt kind of lost. But reading about how selfless Nezha was gave them the strength to make the right choice, even though it was really hard.
It's incredible how a myth can give you that kind of direction. It sounds like the author was doing a lot of soul searching, and Nez's story was kind of like a guide for them to grow.
Mm.
I remember the source saying that at first the author saw Neza as this reckless guy, but their view changed as they got deeper into the story.
Right. At first, it was all about Nezha being rebellious. But as they thought about their own life and the choices they'd made, they started to see how wise Nezha actually was. His sacrifice wasn't just reckless, it was mature. They started to rethink what it really means to be brave and selfless.
That's a huge shift in thinking. It's like the author was using Neza to figure out their own values and motivations. I want to know more about how all this personal growth actually showed up in the author's life. Like, what did it look like?
Yeah, so the source gives some specific examples, like it talks about how the author was struggling at work and wanted to give up, but remembering how persistent Nezha was, even when things were super tough, gave them the push to keep going.
So Neza's story became like a source of strength for them. It gave them the tools to deal with their own problems. It's like they were having a conversation with Neza, asking for advice and inspiration from this legendary figure.
That's a really good way to put it. They weren't just reading passively, they were actively thinking about the story and using it to understand their own experiences and then actually change their life. That's what makes this reflection so powerful. It's more than just enjoying a good story.
It's about taking that story and using it to learn and grow. Which leads me to my next question. What lessons from the story really stuck with the author?
The source talks about three big ones: courage, sacrifice, and redemption. But the really cool part is how the author understands them. Like they see courage as more than just being physically brave. It's about doing the right thing even when it's hard.
I remember that part of the source really stood out to you too. It was about doing what's right. It seems like that idea really hit you hard.
It did, because it made me think about all the times I had to make tough choices. Sometimes courage isn't about some big heroic act. It's about the little things, doing what you know is right, even when it'd be easier to just go along with everyone else.
That's such a good point. It takes courage out of the storybooks and puts it right into everyday life. I can't wait to dig into all of this more and see how it all fits into the author's journey.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting is how the author connects these themes not just to their own life, but to everybody's experience. They see Neza's story as like a reflection of the struggles and triumphs we all go through. It's about how cultural stories can guide us in ways we don't expect.
That's what makes this deep dive so cool. It's not just about one myth. It's about how powerful stories can be. They can change how we see ourselves in the world. I'm excited to keep going and see where this all leads and how the author's experience with Nez's tale can help us on our own journeys.
Me too. There's so much more to unpack here.
So you were saying how the author saw Nez's story as like this reflection of everyone's struggles and triumphs. How did realizing that change how they grew as a person?
I think it really opened their eyes. They started to see that even though the story comes from Chinese mythology, the things it talks about are things everyone deals with no matter what culture or time period. And that made them want to explore myths and stories from all over the world. They started to see them as like the shared human inheritance. All these stories have wisdom and stuff that can help us in our own lives.
It's like finding this secret library of stories that get to the heart of what it means to be human. Do they talk about any other specific myths that really got to them?
Yeah, they mentioned Greek mythology, the story of Odysseus. I think they saw something similar between Odysseus trying to get home and their own struggle to find where they belong in the world.
That's so interesting how different myths can connect with us depending on what's going on in our own lives.
Yep.
The source also mentions how the author didn't really take these myths seriously. At first, they just thought they were fun stories. But Nez's tale changed all that.
Definitely. They realize that these stories aren't just old fairy tales. They're about real stuff, things people have always dealt with. Love loss, betrayal, redemption, trying to find meaning. Those experiences are the same for everyone, no matter what culture you're from.
The source really highlights how these stories can actually help you deal with all that stuff. It's like having this ancient mentor whispering advice in your ear, helping you figure life out.
Yeah, exactly. The source says the author started to see these myths as a source of real practical wisdom. Like they were actually using the lessons from the stories to help them make decisions and solve problems.
So it wasn't just about enjoying the story. It was about actually living it out in their own life.
Yeah,
Do you have an example of how the author actually did that?
for sure. The source talks about this time when the author was facing a really tough decision at work. It was one of those situations where they had to choose between doing what was easy and doing what was right. They thought about how Nezha always stood up for what was right, and it gave them the courage to do the same even though it could have backfired.
Wow, that's a perfect example of how these stories can make you braver. It's like having Nezha right there with you, pushing you to do the right thing.
And the source points out that it wasn't just about big decisions like that. It affected everything they did. It gave them the confidence to speak their minds, set boundaries, and chase their dreams. Really go for it.
So it wasn't just a mental thing, it was a total transformation. It sounds like they came out of this whole experience with a clearer sense of who they are and what they believe in.
Absolutely. The source describes how they felt more grounded, more resilient, and more connected to everything around them. They realized that the wisdom they were looking for was there all along in the stories that had shaped their culture and their imagination.
That's beautiful. It makes me think about all the stories I grew up with, the myths and fairy tales and stuff. I'm starting to see them differently now, not just as stories, but as sources of guidance and inspiration.
That's the power of stories, right? They can take you to other worlds, introduce you to characters who embody these timeless values, and give you insights that help you navigate your own life. The author's journey with Nez's tale is a perfect example of how stories can really change how we see ourselves and the world.
It's like these stories plant little seeds inside us, seeds of courage and wisdom and compassion. And as we go through life, those seeds can grow into something really amazing.
I love that. And as we keep talking about the author's experience with Nezha, I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about one person's growth. It's about how we can learn from each other's cultures and how our experiences are all connected. Like how the author started exploring other mythologies after connecting with Nezha.
Yeah, it's like that one myth opened up this whole world of stories and cultures. It's a huge part of their journey.
Exactly. They realized that if one myth could have such a big impact, imagine all the wisdom out there in all these other cultures and traditions. It's like opening a door to a whole new world of stories and self-discovery.
That's what I love about these deep dives. It's not just about learning some random myth. It's about realizing how powerful stories can be, how they can shape how we see ourselves and the world. It reminds us that you can find wisdom in the most unexpected places.
That's the beauty of myths, right? They go beyond time and place. They offer insights that are just as relevant today as they were hundreds of years ago.
Hmm.
It's like tapping into the shared human experience, a source of knowledge and inspiration.
It's like realizing we're all part of one big story, a tapestry woven from all these stories that have been passed down for generations. Each one has a piece of the human experience in it, showing us our struggles and triumphs and hopes and dreams. Yeah, it's like we all have a piece of that big story inside us, and when we explore these myths, we're finding those hidden connections to our own past and to what makes us human.
And the source makes a really good point that it's not just about knowing more stuff, it's about learning to understand each other better. It's about seeing that we're all human no matter where we're from or what we believe.
It's like realizing that everyone's going through similar things no matter who they are, and these stories can help us deal with that.
Totally. The source talks about how the author felt closer to people from other cultures. After reading their myths, it broke down those walls we build in our minds and helped them feel connected.
Like those stories are bridges to different ways of seeing things. Did they talk about how they use that new understanding in their life?
Yeah, they started looking for ways to connect with other cultures, like going to events with music and dancing from different places and talking to people from different backgrounds. They wanted to learn about their experiences.
It's like they were actively making those connections part of their own life.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that it wasn't just about watching or listening. It was about getting involved, learning new things, and making the world a more welcoming place.
So it all started with personal growth, but it became about so much more seeing the world differently and embracing all the different kinds of people out there. It's really inspiring how those stories can lead to a lifetime of learning and connection.
It really is. And the source ends with this powerful idea that we should all go on our own journeys of exploration, find the stories that speak to us, learn from other cultures, and really understand how connected we all are.
It's a good reminder that there are so many stories out there waiting to be discovered, stories that can change how we think, show us new ways of seeing things, and help us live lives with more meaning.
I think that's a great place to wrap things up, don't you? What stories will you find? What connections will you make? And how will those stories change how you see yourself and the world around you? It's been awesome diving into Nez's tale with you and seeing how this myth led to such incredible personal growth for the author.
I agree. It's been a great deep dive. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. And to our listener, happy exploring.